Welcome to the HMO Property Show. By investors, for investors. Catch us weekly as we discuss all things cash flow positive property investing. Whether you're a seasoned investor, a new landlord, or just curious about property investing, this is the podcast for you. Sponsored by the Co-Living Collective, your trusted partner in creating vibrant and sustainable shared living experiences. Visit us at colivingcollective.com.au to learn more.
Welcome back to the HMO Property Show. I'm your host, as always, Neil Gibb, and today I've got the CEO of Harcourts Western Australia on the podcast. It's Mr. Shane Kempton. Shane, welcome to the podcast.
Good morning, Neil, and how are you today?
I'm very well, thank you, mate. Very, very well indeed. Thank you for coming on. Like I say, CEO of Harcourts Australia, Western Australia. I'm guessing you're a busy man with a lot going on.
Yeah, mate, don't promote me to the Australian CEO just yet. I'll leave that to Adrian. He's got that well and truly covered. I'm quite happy looking after us over here in Western Australia, my friend.
And I can see behind you there, you're an avid reader by the looks of things.
Yeah. It's been a big part of my life is reading and personal development. So, big advocate for it.
Yeah, and I had a check on your LinkedIn last week when Rach told me that we were going to be catching up and chatting, and very, very interesting background as well, which, the leadership and the books and everything, it's all tying in together nicely, mate. So I'm excited for this podcast. I think it'll be really, really good.
Yeah, no, it's good, mate. And I'm always happy to share, my experiences and my journey. If it adds value to other people, and maybe stops them from going down a path that I maybe went down that wasn't quite right and helps them course correct and save them a little bit of time, always happy to help, mate.
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with going down the wrong path either, is there?
Well, you don't want to do it twice. That's the only thing, isn't it? You only do it once, as long as you learn from it.
Yeah. So what I did notice when I looked on your profile was it all started in the military. Is that right?
Yeah, look, I was in real estate initially as a young man, as a young 20-year-old. And my principal and my sales manager were both ex-SAS soldiers. So they were forever talking about their stories and the good old days and things like that. And then when the market sort of went a bit pear-shaped over here in Western Australia in the sort of mid-90s, I thought, well, I might have a crack at getting in there myself. And so I joined the Army for 5 years off the back of their sort of recommendation and their support as well. And I was in a bit of a low point in my life. I'd sort of made some silly financial decisions as a young man, earning good money as a sales rep, but spending it all on fast cars and long lunches and, not really having the right plan. So they seemed to agree that some time in the military might help me with my discipline.
And did it? Did it help with discipline and structure?
Absolutely. And the interesting thing is, when I share this story, I actually learned a lot about discipline before I joined because I had to lose a little bit of weight because I'm quite a tall fella. 6'3". I used to be 6'4", but I think I'm shrinking now. I had to lose a little bit of weight to get my BMI to meet the requirements of the Defence Force. And so I had to do quite a strict regime of, exercise and food and lifestyle to get my weight to that required level. What drove me was my compelling vision to get in. So if one of the lessons I learned straight away was, having the power of a compelling vision gives you that discipline and that drive, to achieve your goals. And so by the time I got into the Army, I was well versed in discipline and structure, and they just only enhanced that experience for me. And 5 wonderful years full time, 5 years part time, definitely served me very well as a young man and as a father and as a leader. I can only have praise for my time in the Army.
Yeah, great. You mentioned something there, compelling vision.
Yes.
And how does that tie in with what you've learned there into the leadership role that you find yourself in today?
Look, I think without, if we have weak visions, we have weak desire, and if we got weak desire, we have weak discipline. So having that vision that drives us every day where we're future focused, not present past thinking, but present future thinking is what gives us drive as humans. Having that something to aim for drives our biology. We're designed that way. We get dopamine releases in the pursuit of our goals, not just in the achievement of them. So we're actually wired to be constantly pursuing those things that matter most to us. And a compelling vision is a big part of that. If you don't know what you're aiming for, you're just wandering and you're going to get distracted by every other sort of breeze and popular trend. But if you're really clear what you want out of life and where you want to achieve, it keeps you really focused and on the path of to get you to your success that you're looking for.
I think Tony Robbins says happiness is progress towards a worthy goal. And that comes back to the compelling vision, doesn't it?
Yep. So all just said in different ways, but I guess the method is the same.
Yeah. And I noticed it was quite early on in your career you were CEO of Harcourts WA. What year was that?
Yeah, so look, I initially started my career in the early 90s, spent 3 years as a sales rep, then went off into the military in 95, came back in 2000, back with my old boss again. He's welcomed me back, but he says, mate, you're starting back down there's no privileges, mate. You're starting back to where you began. So humble beginnings again back in 2000. I worked my way up to sales manager, and by 2005, I bought the business from him, myself and some other shareholders. We took that business to number one for our group at the time, which was Roy Weston. Around 2004, 2005, Harcourts bought Roy Weston, which was a strong brand over here in Western Australia. They were a part of their national expansion, which was going gangbusters. So I had the number one office for a couple of years, and then I sold that office to move into the role of CEO for Roy Weston as part of their transition to moving Roy Weston to Harcourts. So I was a year and a bit as the Roy Weston CEO, but most of that time was preparing the brand to move over and transition to the Harcourts, which was massive, emotionally draining stage, hard on a lot of people who've been with the brand for 50 years. It was a big play, it was a big move, and I learnt a lot from that experience. You know, as a young man and not a lot of corporate experience, just really running from my gut and my heart and my relationships really to make that work. But, you know, you look now 20 years down the track, or 19, our 20th anniversary is coming up here. It's been a successful move, and those offices have really gone in leaps and bounds that are on that Harcourts journey. So, I spent a couple of years in that role back in the early 2000s. So I think 2005 to 2007, I was the CEO for Harcourts Western Australia. But I had a burning desire to get out there speaking and coaching and training. A lot of my success in my own office was built on my ability to train people to be better than what I was. You know, I had a gift for coaching and training, and I trained a lot of our people internally to be great. And then other officers saw what I was doing, got me to help them in their role, in their offices. And so that momentum of coaching and speaking started to build. And I thought I had a really good story to share about how we became number one. So that desire to speak and train really drove me to leave that position of Harcourts CEO back in 2007, 2008, to go a full-time speaker and trainer out to the industry, which I had, 5 or 6 years full-time doing that, which I really enjoyed.
Incredible. Before we get into that journey then about the public speaking, what was a day in the life like as a CEO of Harcourts WA back in the early 2000s?
A different world, realestate.com was just starting to form, the domain, the websites and the internet was really starting to get some momentum, and so businesses were adapting and moving to this new technological age, a digital age. A lot of my time was spent preparing for the rebrand. There was a lot involved in that, but not dissimilar to this role now. For me as a CEO, it's a corny phrase, but I believe it, and that it's that you're the chief energy officer. The energy you drive from the CEO position and the service you provide to your people is a lot to do with your energy. And so I'd like to get out to the offices. I'd like to talk to the frontline troops. I'd like to be in the trenches with them, next to the business owners, doing business plans and things like that. And that's one thing. Harcourts' model is very much, hasn't changed a lot. It's just evolved and used technology to get better. But that in the office, working with your business owners, working with the salespeople, working with the property managers in your offices, helping them to be the best they can be, has been a great formula for Harcourts, and something that aligned really well with my values, because I'm a natural coach and trainer. So what I did back then is similar to what I do now, but just at a more skillful level, I believe, and digitally enhanced, I guess, as well.
The digital revolution. It's interesting that you said back then all of that tech was just coming out then, but now we just take it for granted like it's always been there, don't we?
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
Yeah, it was
fast-paced, I suppose, now.
Yeah, yep, exactly. And the fundamentals are still there. Real estate is about relationships, and what technology does is gives us the ability to amplify that, to maybe speak to more people more often. But at the end of the day, it's that belly-to-belly, face-to-face conversation that really wins the hearts and minds, and you earn the trust to get the keys to someone's biggest asset. After an hour or 2 hour conversation, they're handing over their biggest asset to you. It's a gift and it's a privilege, and and I say that to rookies when they join. I say that to remind our people that have been around a long time that we are in a privileged position in what we do in real estate.
Absolutely. How many offices are you looking after then as the CEO?
We're pushing 25 now, so we've had a really good couple of years of growth here in Western Australia for us. 6 offices joined us in the last 12 months. It took a little while to get that momentum right again. You know, we'd come out of a difficult market in Western Australia. The prices had been suppressed. And then, you know, COVID hit, as we know, and it just changed the game. Everything we thought would happen didn't, and everything that we didn't think happened. And so we really got some good ability to offload some of that stock. I mean, I was coaching a guy down south, and he was carrying 150 listings prior to COVID. And then come COVID, you know, after the back of that, he now carries 20 or 30 regularly. So just that shift in the market was just massive. And it changed the way we sort of, the success of our people here, and really pumped our tyres up a lot over here in Western Australia, and we haven't really looked back. You know, the market's just been continually growing at a steady rate for us. We haven't had a massive peak and dip. We sort of had this great trajectory over here in Western Australia, which is nice to see.
We definitely have. We'll talk about the market in general soon, because with some of the other podcasts we've been doing just recently, we've been speaking to area experts and getting local agents on to talk about their specific suburb. But it'd be interesting looking at it from a CEO's standpoint that is looking after 25 different offices now across the region.
Yeah.
But let's talk about public speaking and leadership in general, because, you know, as a real estate agent or in real estate, marketing is a big thing. Everyone thinks of the sales, but to get them sales, we need to market ourselves, and public speaking is one of them. How does leadership tie into public speaking, and then teaching people about the marketing aspects to then get the listing so that they can sell that person's greatest asset?
Yeah, look, it's definitely a skill if you haven't got it. And I wasn't a natural speaker. I was very much a very nervous person and shy. I used to talk loud and fast to overcome those nerves in the early days. But getting training like from people like Toastmasters and doing public speaking courses, and I was very lucky. I spent a lot of early in my career working with a guy by the name of Matt Church, who's like the coach of coaches, the speaker of speakers. You know, he's a great guy, and really I saw him speak at ARIC one year. And as a young sort of broke sales rep, I sort of spent all my money to get over to ARIC, and I saw him speak there, and I thought, wow, I've got to get to know this guy, because the way he just worked the stage, the way he engaged the audience, he was compelling, you know, and I thought, what a wonderful skill to have, to be able to, if you want to influence people in the right way, you've got to be able to communicate. You've got to be a great orator. And so I think learning how to be a good public speaker, even if it's just in front of your own team, in an office, in a sales meeting, or addressing the whole office once a month, you need to be able to do that in a very authentic way, I think, firstly. Like, I wouldn't ever swap being authentic and genuine over being fake and polished. You know, I think being raw, and you see that these days, the polished videos don't get as much airtime as those that are raw and being genuine, you know, because there's so much fake out there. So the more you can be yourself, the more you can, you know, wear a cowboy hat or, you know, and a Cobra and be yourself and have your own sort of stamp on things, I think is really important. Particularly as a leader, you know, you need to be able to get your vision across. People need to buy into it. They need to believe in what you believe, and they'll only believe that if you can articulate that in a way that they understand and it resonates with their core values and their identity and their journey.
There's a reason that you wear the Akuba as well, isn't there?
Yeah. Look, I'm super passionate about men's mental health, and that's born from my own time in the military. I was very fortunate I didn't see active service, but a lot of my mates did, and my nephew has as well. And so I see some of my mates that have come back, you know, not the same as they used to be. And so we wanted to do something about that. And 2014, my journey started. I set up a motorcycle club. I was right into motorcycles back then. And we set up a motorcycle club for the contemporary veterans called the Military Brotherhood Military Motorcycle Club over here in Western Australia. And that was all about giving our returned veterans a sense of belonging, a sense of something familiar. You know, we ride in formation, we wear uniforms, we use terms. But more importantly, it was the service we'd give to other veterans. We would go out to the RSLs. We'd visit the older World War II and Vietnam veterans. We would go and help the war widows with their gardening around the house. So they had a real mission, a sense of purpose. And that club is around Australia. I didn't start it in Australia. I just brought it over here to Western Australia. But it's grown with momentum. It's definitely saved lives and helped a lot of our veterans. And off the back of that was when everyone was doing, you know, push-ups for mental health awareness and things like that. And I thought, which is great, but it really showed me that there's a bigger need out there for men's mental health. And I prefer the term mental fitness. I'm not a mental health expert. I'm sort of dealing with that person that's at that cusp of before that gets down to that level. So I do a lot of work with men's mental fitness and mental fitness in general, where people find themselves in a rut. You know, they get that eat, sleep, work, repeat rut, sit on the lounge, drink a six-pack of beer, go to sleep, wake up, do the same thing. Days turn into weeks, weeks turns into months, and next minute they've got a beer belly, no friends, no social network, and they're feeling depressed. I want to really break that cycle, and if you follow some of my social feeds, you see everything to me is about lifestyle, getting outdoors, the simple things, family, friends. It's not about massive amounts of friends, it's about a core quality group. And the life over here in Western Australia, as you're aware, is a lot of fly in, fly out workers. A lot of people come here without that network, and so they end up being quite isolated, and potentially loneliness starts to kick into their life. So we started this group called the Steak Sandwich Men's Get Together, which basically was, every 4 to 6 weeks, we'd pick a local pub somewhere in Western Australia. I'd boost a Facebook ad out there saying, hey, men, brothers, gentlemen, if you're in the area, if you want to just catch up with some other like-minded people for a chat and a bit of banter, the invitation's open. That's been very successful. We've got some good numbers to those at different local pubs, and strangers come together, we have a chat. It's not therapy, but it is therapeutical. You can go there and say nothing. You can just sit back and watch, but the fact that you're around some other people, sometimes that's enough to break the cycle. And Neil, I've been blown away. At the end of those nights, sometimes I've had guys come up to me saying, mate, you just saved my life. I didn't think anything was worth it anymore, couldn't find mates. So you save one person out of that. You're just surprised how much mental fitness and mental health is such a... it needs a lot of attention in our world, and if I'm making a little difference there with a steak sandwich every 4 to 6 weeks, and my blogs that I write and stuff, then I'm moving the needle in the right way, and that's the main thing.
I'm a big supporter of the mental health or mental fitness. We support local charities where we support the Happiness Corps with Julian Pace.
Yeah, great.
Where I'm a board member for Arm for Life, which is a charity that goes through schools and helps build resilience and explain resilience and healthy relationships and bullying and stuff like that to children. Yeah, because if we can solve this problem a little bit earlier rather than getting them out of school and into work and then trying to fix it then we've saved a lot of time. So I'm a big fan of that. I'm a big supporter of it. We can't get enough of it.
It's good, because when we grew up, and particularly being an ex-military man and being in the military at the time when I was in, it was all about go to Bunnings, get a bag of cement and harden up. There was never that sort of... Being vulnerable was a sign of weakness. Now it's being vulnerable is definitely a superpower. If you can be vulnerable in front of the right people and get the help, it's a sign of strength. And I love the work that you guys are doing there at that next generation level. Like you said, if we can get them already thinking. And, I saw one of the young Bulldogs players from the AFL guy, I just can't think of his name right now, speaking on the news. He's a 23-year-old, prime of his life playing AFL footy, yet he was struggling really bad with mental illness challenges there, and he reached out, didn't quite get the help he wanted, and so he's really advocating about, getting the right help out there now, which is great to see, and the club's getting behind him, and I think the AFL is making some moves in that space, but you can definitely see there's a movement happening, and it matters, you got to win that game between the ears, because that's your reality, not out here, it's in here. You get that right, then everything else out there takes care of itself.
One of the things that does affect people's mental fitness, mental health, is housing. We don't have enough housing right now. The market's on its knees. We've got people living on their own, living in cars in tents, sleeping on sofas, etc. So let's talk about the market in general and looking at it from a holistic view like you are, Shane. What are the metrics you track as a CEO on a daily, weekly, a monthly basis?
Yeah, look, good question. Look, I'm very lucky. I try to keep it as real as I can. As an industry, we've got access to some great data from the different data companies that are out there. Our institute over here in Western Australia is fantastic. REWA, they have some great up-to-date market stats and things like that. That's definitely one source I lean on, is all those information-based companies and our stats and our data. I love hearing what's happening on the ground from my officers. So the advantage of being a CEO that's out and about, I listen to what our officers are experiencing out there, and our salespeople and our property managers. Imagine being a property manager during COVID and post that, and even right now when you've got 50, 60, 70, 80 couples lining up for a house, and you've got to say no to 78 people, and 2 lucky people get the property. It's super demanding on our mental fitness, and so that has an impact. So I listen to what's happening on the ground to get that real-time information, and then I also lean on my sphere of influence. I've got young children, young adult children now. My youngest and his wife are going. They've had to live with us for the last 18 months. Even the CEO of a real estate brand couldn't get them into a rental, you know what I mean? That's how tight it was, no favours. So they've saved up now and built a house, but they're in the last suburb of Perth. They're out in Two Rocks. Right. That was the only place they could get into and afford, and they're paying sort of around that mid 500s to get into their first home, which is obviously better than some of the other states, but still, an hour from work minimum, a long way away to get into property. And without mum and dad's help, they wouldn't have been able to do that, to be able to save up for a couple of years to get that deposit. So I listen to all those stories, and then I make the sort of decisions and strategies and positioning and articles based on what I hear on all those collective things. One office might not be seeing any first home buyers in the market, yet you go to the other end of the river and all it is first home buyers in there. So you've got to be careful that you just don't take your information from one source. Like you said at the start, it's holistic. You've got to have your finger on the pulse everywhere. If you just listen to the western suburbs, then you're only going to hear great news, $10, $15 million property selling every week. Well, that doesn't help the bloke down in Kelmscott, who's might be having properties down there. So you've just got to be, in my role, I've got to be across multiple sort of information feeds and then make collective decisions and bespoke ones as well based on what area that people are in. Often in real estate we get trainers that come from the East Coast and they'll talk to us about what's happening, and they think it's relevant to us. But very often when the East Coast is in a buyer's market, we're in a seller's market and vice versa. So again, you've got to give good briefs to people when they're delivering information, and you need to be across all information sources as yourself if you're in a position of influence.
100%. And the best thing about the data that you're getting from your real estate agents is it's live, it's boots on the ground. This is exactly what's happening right now, and this is what we're seeing. But the data that we're seeing from CoreLogic and from REWA, it's historical. We've collated this, and this is what happened previously, but it's not a real snapshot. And the market can change quite fast, can't it? We've seen that previously, especially in the Perth market.
One announcement of tariffs, that changes the game as well.
Yeah.
It can be a global trend that changes things, in an instant as well. So, it's good to get that boots on the ground feedback, which I rely on probably more than anything.
Yeah. So we've seen the Perth market from 2021 onwards really push hard. We've seen property prices almost double in some suburbs in a very short space of time. And then towards the back end of 2024, we seen the market sort of quieting down a little bit. And this is when we started hearing a lot of the buyers agents that are in the Facebook group saying that the Perth market's flat and we should all move on to the next market. And I think a lot of investors have potentially moved a little bit too early. And this is why we're having these conversations now, because I still think Perth's got a very, very strong runway ahead of it, shall we say? So it'd be interesting to hear what you're hearing from your guys, maybe from the start of the year to now, and then what they're actually saying now that's different to what was happening at the start of the year.
Yeah, Neil, you're bang on with your comments there, and obviously the people you're interviewing, you're getting great information, mate, which is wonderful to see, and you're sharing that. Look, definitely at the end of 2024, we did see a bit of a slowing coming into the new year. Like you said, the buyer's agents stopped looking around. For the first time ever, we started to see listings go up, and I was talking in my offices and going from selling one for one, list one property, they were selling one property, listing two. So we were starting to see that dynamic at the start of the year, which was quite interesting. But then and a lot of those investors, particularly that were buying in WA, went to Victoria because the median price sort of met, and there was a lot of media about that as well. But then come sort of that February, March, things started to change again. I think people realised, hang on, there's still a long runway to go here in WA. We've got great job opportunities over here. Immigration, the new numbers of those. Those people are going to move somewhere. We get 10% of that 2 million that are moving here. We've already got a deficit of houses. So, the supply, the demand is still outweighing the demand. Sorry, the other way. Sorry, the demand is outweighing the supply.
Yeah.
So there's waiting lists at the moment for emergency housing. I think it's like 12,000 people on emergency housing, let alone people like my son and others that have been trying to get into housings. And the only way they're going to be able to replenish that is through building. And it's taking 12, 18 months to build a house at the moment. So we're a long way away off from even becoming parable. And that there, to me, simple supply and demand sort of metrics tells me when demand's high, supply is low, it's going to continue to just drive those prices. We don't want it to peak, and I don't think we are peaking and troughing. I think we've got a really good steady growth, and some of those suburbs in the last 4 years around have doubled. The amount of properties turning into $1 million suburbs now across WA is growing each year at a rapid rate. So there's a lot happening out there. And I reckon, you could be bullish about this and say we've got another 18 months, 2 years before we'd see any significant changes in the market, pending any global sort of issues out there that are relevant as of this weekend, could make a change and change confidence at the very least.
That's the biggest thing that drives, right? Buyer sentiment or market sentiment. If it's high, people are in. If it's low, people are out, and people sit on the fence and stop back.
Yeah, exactly.
I read an interesting article this morning talking about supply and demand. We've obviously got too many people, which is the demand, and not enough supply coming through. And it seems that the only areas that we're getting houses out the ground currently is in the fringe suburbs, like your kids are moving into there in Two Rock. One sort of quick fix, if it's a quick fix, is building apartments, even though they take 2 to 3 years to come out the ground. But because nothing stacks up at feasibility stage right now, the only things that are coming out the ground are build to rent, because there's a lot of stimulus from the government as well as grants, etc. So even though we're getting some apartments out the ground, which are build to rent, which is where developers build and hold and rent them out, we're not building any apartments for people to technically buy as well. So we're still going to have this kind of mismatch in the market of lots of fringe suburbs, nothing kind of infill, which is what we need right now.
Yeah.
So how do we fix that problem, Shane? You got any ideas?
Yeah, I don't think I'm in the right pay grade, mate, for that. I think we got to start thinking what we're currently doing is not working. So, if we keep doing the same thing, we're going to get the same results. So we need to do something different. And I'm seeing now some really good products coming out of the tiny home market and those container home markets, transportable type homes. So I think we need to start thinking about that, and maybe some of the bylaws might need to change to be a little bit more, less red tape to allow some of these types of properties to get into the market. Some of these tiny homes and, container type homes, they can build them within, 6 to 10 weeks. They're out of the ground, ready to live in. Australian standards, all that type of stuff, and they don't need a lot of land. So I think it solves two problems. You could infill with some of these in some of the more larger blocks around the inner cities. You could have on a traditional, duplex site could turn into a quadruplex site with 4 of these pairs. So you can double the number of properties that go on there. So I think some more research into that, or some more decision making, or some more feasibility around that could be a great solution which can return a quick return for us in regards to getting more houses on the ground. I think that one there would be a great one, a great place I would start if I was in the power of influence.
I mean, it makes it more affordable as well, right? The problem that we've got is everybody wants an affordable house, right? But they want the 3x2 or the 4x2 with the games room and a theatre room, and obviously these things cost money to build, right? You're building a tiny home, which, it's some between 50 to 70 square metres. You've got the bare essentials in there, but mainly it's shelter, and it's affordable shelter. Granny flats, I'm a big fan of them. Yeah, it was a big move by the government to say that they were going to make granny flats applicable as in not needing development application. We went out and bought a few sites in Kwinana and put granny flats on them, and we had to go through planning, believe it or not, after the government had just said we don't need it. So, even though the housing minister's saying one thing, we've got local shire saying another, which is when the planning framework doesn't really align with the message that's getting put out there.
That's what a shame, isn't it? Particularly when you think about the corner blocks that we have around Perth, the opportunity to have dual driveway, access to, potentially one, even 2 tiny homes off a dual access. The amount of elderly that are staying home now because of the stay-at-home service is tying up a lot of these big houses. But if you gave them an option to stay in their familiar block of land in their own garden, but in a lovely smaller home, rent out their bigger home to a family that needs it, or sell it to make some other money. You know what I mean? There's so many ways that we could reuse what we've got in a world of recycling. Let's start recycling what we've got. Let's recycle our current house and land, and turn them into maybe 2 or 3 residents rather than one.
I've got an interesting story on that though, Shane, because we did a development a few years ago. We put some, at the time they were called single bedroom dwellings. So you got a reduction in your minimum lot size if you built a 70 square metre house on that lot, and they needed to be 70 square metres and have 1 bedroom. Now they're called small dwellings under the new design code.
Yes, yep.
So we put 4 of these on one block, and then at the back of the block we built a 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom property, and we said, we'll probably get some single females in some of these single bedders, and then we'll probably get a family in a 3x2 at the back. And this little old lady came and she said, I'll take the 3x2 at the back because it's got bedrooms for the grandkids.
How good.
Just threw it out of whack. So it's like, this is what the market technically needs, but does it want that at the same time as well? Because some of these people that are downsizing or right-sizing, should we say, they've also got a lot of equity in the properties that they've owned for the last 20 or 30 years. Yes. So, yeah, it's an interesting kind of, this is what it should need, but this is what it kind of doesn't want at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah, a classic example, not one size fits all, isn't it? But at least it would provide some additional solutions for those that could use it as well, So I think if we're just waiting for your traditional developer to slice and dice up a paddock and then put some, 350 square metre lots, we're a long way away off from solving any problems. But if we can come up with these other solutions, I think it's a start. It'd be some wins in the short term that we desperately need.
Are you seeing these tiny homes or the smaller homes being successful in any particular suburbs at the minute?
Not really. I haven't seen any really where I can say, hey, here's a great example of it. There's definitely, I know people that are building prefabbed homes.
Yep.
That's starting to get a bit more momentum. And again, their build times are a quarter of what a traditional home is. As again, it's a fine in the local authorities to give them approval to be able to build these, which is exciting. I think the technology's there, and there's people out there trying to find building solutions. It's just now the red tape being able to let our people deliver on these things. It'd be interesting to see. I'd love to see someone with a great example of some tiny homes that we could share on a podcast. That I think that'd be a great story, and it'd probably get a lot of airtime too.
Yeah, having the solution's one thing as well, like you say, but the acceptance of that product for a long time. You'll know this as well. The double brick mania that swept through the state, and it's only took a pandemic to make people actually look at a different way of building and accepting these different builds as well.
You opened up the show by talking about a marketing campaign. How good was that double brick campaign by the brick company back in the day, mate? They sold us on that. It was a ripper.
Yeah. So looking at the market now, Shane, is there any particular suburbs that you're seeing are going quiet and any particular suburbs that primed for growth or actually moving in the right direction? And is there any reasons that are affecting both of them markets?
Look, I couldn't tell you offhand anything I know that's going off the market. I think we get steady growth really around Perth at the moment. Interestingly, like the Southwest, I keep an eye on that quite a bit, and there hasn't been as many investors in that sort of Bunbury region as there were previously. But again, they're a little bit slower to react to the Perth market. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see investors returning to that Bunbury market the second half of this year, particularly Busselton, with the airport down there, international, interstate flights happening down there. There's a lot of fly-in, fly-out workers now moving down that way. So if I was going to have a sneaky side bet on something, I'd be seeing those areas down there. I think are great. Around your Pemberton, your Manjimups, your Quindalup area down there. I mean, that's getting some massive growth down there, and that's areas that were sort of you'd go around there for a weekend once a year for a holiday. We're now seeing people move there that are willing to work from home and commute as well. So just to get that tree change, I think the Southwest is an interesting place to keep an eye on. Mandurah has had some great success down there. Our Mandurah office down there has, been the number one office for the last 12 years, number two globally for Harcourts.
Wow.
And you think where Mandurah was 10 years ago, it wasn't moving that well, but now, it's got suburbs down there that are going gangbusters. Halls Head, been around for a long time, but there's some, little secret pockets in there which are going well with good sized blocks. In fact, the whole Peel region is exciting, I think they've had around 15% growth over the last 12 months. Erskine, Greenfields, weren't traditionally go-to suburbs. Traditionally your sort of first home buyer area have really grown with popularity. Kelmscott would be similar. If you think about the southeast area, Kelmscott would be a similar area for that first home buyer investor market. There's great opportunities there. Then you go to that sort of second home buyer. You talk about sort of Southern River. It's got some great expansions down there. There's some big projects sort of happening down that way. One of the areas I think is a real hidden gem is Rockingham. I think Rockingham is there's some exciting stuff happening down there, particularly with the Defence Force stuff that's happening down there, the building of boats, the Americans moving over there. Yep. To me, I think there's some really good opportunities around that Baldivis, Waikiki, Shoalwater Bay. Around there, I think there's some good stuff, both residentially and commercially. I think if you're looking at commercial is not my expertise. We've got NAI Harcourts, and I can put you in touch with Tony there if you want to have a bit of a delve into the commercial opportunities at the moment. But there's some ripper stuff happening down there, and those looking for a bit of lifestyle could be looking at more that Wellard, Carnup sort of areas as well, Safety Bay on the beach. And then if you move north, you've got places like Alkimos, which was, God, who wants to build an Alkimos? You'd be saying that a few years ago in Butler. Alkimos is sort of the midway point now between Up and Two Rocks, but there's still some affordability up there. They're building some great infrastructure. I believe Olympic-sized swimming pool up at Alkimos. So there's all these little things, and I think the tips of good investing hasn't changed. Look for good transport, look for infrastructure. If you can get near the river or the ocean or the hills, you've got good opportunities, and you've just summed up Perth. That's why we've got good growth in Perth, because we pretty much, from our coast to the hills, is not that far apart, and everything in between is a 15-minute drive to either one.
There's one suburb that you mentioned there, and thank you for that holistic view there. There's one suburb that you mentioned which last time we had this kind of push in the market, it dipped off, and it was very interesting to hear that it's been your number one office as well. So Mandurah. Yeah, it got pumped last time, and then it was the first one to drop, and then it took a long time to recover.
Yeah.
Is there a chance that could happen again, do you think, or is it a different place now, different time, different place?
Look, I think because of the amount of money that's being spent in Mandurah, you've got a really good accessible train line down there as well. Like the commute from Mandurah to Perth now to work, like my office down there, when we run a training session at head office, they don't drive, they just jump on the train. It's just easier, it's quicker, no parking, they can just walk straight into our office, and it's very user-friendly. It's probably only 15 minutes difference on the train than it is to drive. So they take that option, which is great. I think that there's a lot more younger families moved into Mandurah as well, which again is different. The demographic has shifted from the old retiree to this more younger, affordable family in there. And those other suburbs that weren't as popular are now starting to get popular, like Greenfields and Meadow Springs and places like that. You've got all that stuff that's getting built from sort of north of Mandurah to fill up that gap, sort of all the way up to Rockingham through there on both sides of the road. There's plenty of shops, there's plenty of industrial in there, so there's employment opportunities, which I think we've got to be really mindful of, is when we build too far in these outer suburbs and there's no infrastructure for these young people and they have to drive hours to get to work without any sort of public transport. That's when it becomes an issue. But if you're building eating areas, some restaurants, maybe a pub, good shopping facilities, then they create great communities, and they become really connected in there. The kids play sports, they've got good schools, they start to hang out, they create these vibrant communities. And I think if you're going to give some kudos to the developers out there, they're getting really savvy with that now. It's not just, we build communities, they are building communities, they're making sure if they slice and dice a paddock, the big boys are making sure there's good infrastructure in there, schools, resources for them to be employed and to be thriving as a community.
Excellent. And we've covered a lot today, mate. What's the median house price in Perth currently?
Geez, mate, great question. Are we pushing 7? Are we up around that mark, Nick?
So let's say you got the median house price in your pocket to spend on a house. What would you buy in what suburb and why?
Look, I think Connolly is you're going to pay a little bit more for Connolly. I think these sort of suburbs that sit on the fringes of popular ones, I think are pretty exciting. The new marina in Ocean Reef, that is exciting what they're building, and that is going to be spectacular. So I think Ocean Reef has got some great opportunity in there if you can find something in that sort of under the mill mark. Mindari's starting to come into its own as well. I think Mindari's starting to find its feet now. It's now not the furthest suburb away. It's got some good infrastructure up there, etc. If you move sort of down south ways, that sort of around that Coburn Central, sort of heading towards the coast in there, I think there's some really sleeping giants in there as well. They're still quite old, but if you're talking about land value and accessibility and closeness to the city, to the coast, etc., I think that belt through there has got some massive opportunity to go through there. But look, I think my advice is the same to anyone. When you're buying a property, be in it for the long term. If you're just trying to speculate and turn it over in a couple of years, that's where a lot of people get hurt. But if you're happy to be in it for your 10 years, we know property values have doubled every 10 to 12 years over the last 100 years. Sometimes it doubles in 4 years, sometimes it takes 15, but the average is there. So if you're buying property, just be in it for the long haul and just do all your research if you're going to start speculating and looking for high turnover, quick sort of turnover jobs. That's where people get burnt if you're not experienced in it or getting the wrong advice.
Beautiful. Mr. Shane Kempton, it's been an absolute pleasure catching up, and thank you for coming on the podcast.
My pleasure, Neil. Thank you very much, and I'm really grateful for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Welcome to the HMO Property Show. By investors, for investors. Catch us weekly as we discuss all things cash flow positive property investing.